We are witnessing a total political system failure in America. If you're anything like me, you may find yourself constantly overwhelmed by everything that's wrong with politics. And when I say politics, I'm not talking about Democrats or Republicans. I'm talking about the flaws that exist in our political system, regardless of which party is in power. The government is ours. We pay for it, so it needs to work for us. And right now it doesn't, and I mean it really doesn't. Only 4% of Americans have a great deal of confidence in Congress now. Just 4%. America is no longer even considered a full democracy. We are witnessing a total political system failure in America, which is the complete opposite of what our nation's founders had in mind. Preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact on public policy. How in the hell does that happen? Politicians are spending up to 70% of their time raising funds for re-election after they get into office. Why? Because in order to win a seat in the Senate in some races, you would have to raise $45,000 every single day, 365 days a year for 6 years to raise enough money to win. Now consider that only 0.05% of Americans give more than $10,000 to politics. And then you see why politicians have become completely dependent on the 0.05% of Americans, billionaires and special interest groups, who fund their campaigns. Meanwhile, you've got lobbyists writing our laws and donating to the politicians who pass them. We have a two-party duopoly of Democrats and Republicans that makes it so that independents can't win, while the American people are leaving the major parties in droves. As you can see here, nearly half of American voters are now registered independent. And then there's gerrymandering, with politicians drawing the boundaries of their own voting districts into crazy shapes designed to prevent competition. And we wonder why young people feel that their vote doesn't matter. I've covered a lot here, but it all adds up to this vast ring of influence over our elected leaders. It's a corrupt system in which we, the people, have near zero influence over our own government. And that is sad. That is not the country I feel like I grew up in. But what's worse is that by allowing this to happen, we are causing the failure of the most important issues facing our nation. We're wasting trillions of dollars a year on fraud and abuse in our own government. 1 in 5 American children live in poverty. Our health care is the most expensive in the world. We have more people in prison per capita than Russia and China. We're losing jobs to the rest of the world, and we're not even doing enough to keep our air and our water clean for our children. America was founded on the promise of self-governance, but instead we have statistically non-significant impact on public policy. So the question is, how do we unrig this system? I'm obsessed with this idea, not just of unrigging it, but actually fixing it. That's when I met Josh.
This is it. This is the issue behind the issues. If we fix the system, we'll have so much more power to fix everything else. So I spoke to some of the most brilliant people in the country. Constitutional scholar Lawrence Lessig, Zephyr Teachout, and dozens of other constitutional scholars and experts and strategists. They all said the same thing. You could pass a law that would stop political bribery and fix our broken elections, and if you could do that, you could wrest power away from the corrupt establishment and put it back in the hands of the people. Here's how you fix our broken elections. End gerrymandering with independent redistricting commissions.
Create ranked choice voting so third parties and independents can run and win.
Implement automatic voter registration and vote from home.
And here's how we can crack down on political bribery. Overhaul lobbying and ethics laws and close the revolving door so politicians can't be bribed with high-paying job offers.
Mandate full transparency of political spending so we know who's trying to buy influence.
Give every voter a $50 or $100 tax voucher so politicians spend time fundraising from their constituents, not just that 0.05% that I talked about earlier.
If you could pass even just some of these reforms, you would undo that ring of influence and begin to reinstate we the people as the most important influence over our elected leaders. So we took all of these reforms and put them in a model law and named it the Anti-Corruption Act. And get this, 87% of Americans support making the Anti-Corruption Act the law of the land. Look at the breakdown. 91% of Democrats and 83% of Republicans. It's incredible. Now you might be thinking 9 out of 10 Americans. surely Congress will pass it. But on this issue, more than any other issue, it's like asking the fox to put a lock on the henhouse. Politicians won in the current system, and they have an incentive not to fix it. So we need to go around Congress, in this case, by passing anti-corruption acts in cities and states all across America. Now, every time I say this, people look at me and say, how does passing city and state laws lead to fixing all of these problems with the federal government?
Can I do this part?
Go for it.
So, first of all, the US Constitution gives states sole control over how elections are run, even federal elections. So when we fix gerrymandering or election laws, that fixes a federal election in each state. That means that by going state by state, we have an immediate impact on how we elect Congress and how we hold them accountable. But there's more, and that brings us to our second line. This line is from a Bloomberg News study. It finds that throughout American history, passing state laws leads to federal victory. Let me show you what I mean. This chart shows the number of states over time that pass laws giving women the right to vote. When it hits the right side of the chart, that's the federal victory. Okay, now I want you to watch the blue line. We're gonna do this again with interracial marriage. There were a few states in the Northeast that made it legal decades ago, and centuries go by, and we hit this blue line where all of a sudden there's a rush of activity, which leads pretty quickly to federal passage. So here we are again with same-sex marriage. One state, Massachusetts, for many years. A couple decades later, we hit that blue line, a jump in state activity and federal passage. This isn't about these issues. This is about a winning political strategy. The crucial finding in the Bloomberg study is that a key event, often a court decision or a grassroots campaign reaching maturity, triggers a rush of state activity that ultimately leads to a change in federal law. So fixing this problem is possible, but how do we create our trigger moment for this issue? Well, the grassroots campaign from the study, that's Represent Us. We're bringing conservatives and progressives together to pass anti-corruption laws all across America. Liberals and conservatives working together, corruption, and build a movement. This is the foundation of Represent Us. We believe the government should work for every American, not just a handful of billionaires and special interests. And that brings us to our last line. Right now, this is you. And right now, these are all of the ways that you can help us go state by state, city by city, to fix the corruption in American politics. Volunteer and join a Represent Us chapter. Or, if that's not your thing, join the Commonwealth to make a monthly donation in support of someone who does volunteer. 100% of your money goes straight to passing these laws, not to overhead or our expenses. Every voice matters. Your voice matters. If you do nothing, nothing changes. But if we all do a little, we can win together. Will you cross that line? Join us at represent.us.
Today, we are calling 911 on American democracy. The Voting Rights Act, the crowning achievement of the civil rights movement, an act that Lewis and so many others bled and sacrificed their lives for, was gutted by the Supreme Court in 2013, throwing open the floodgates of voter suppression. Within hours, Texas announced a strict new voter ID law. Mississippi, Alabama, and 14 states followed suit, cutting Americans out of their own democracy. 15,000 polling places have been closed nationwide since 2008. An unprecedented 16 million voters have been purged from the rolls. A narrow majority of the Supreme Court officially legalized partisan gerrymandering. They gave their official blessing for partisans to cut voters out and rig elections. This decision, the fourth lethal blow from the court to our fragile democracy, following their 2010 Citizens United, 2013 Shelby, and 2018 Husted decisions, made it strikingly clear that we, the people, are the last defense and best hope to protect and advance the democracy we deserve. We will demand that Washington pass these 3 reforms to save American democracy. Number 1, protect our right to vote. End voter purges. Make Election Day a holiday. Pass automatic voter registration, early voting, same-day registration, vote at home, and restore the vote for returning citizens with past felony convictions. Number 2, make elections secure and competitive. Stop foreign meddling in our elections. End gerrymandering. Pass ranked choice voting to enable independent and third-party candidates to run and win. Number 3, end political corruption. End secret donations. Close the revolving door between government and the lobbying industry. And create democracy vouchers or small donor matching that make politicians dependent on voters instead of big money interest. The people have spoken in 2018 in so-called red and blue states with a wave of the most city and state anti-corruption and pro-democracy victories in American history. Over 80% of American voters want to see these anti-corruption and pro-democracy reforms enacted at the federal level.
There is a new push to make sure that every eligible ballot is counted in 2020. It's led by Stacey Abrams, the 2018 Democratic candidate for governor of Georgia. She lost to Republican Brian Kemp by less than 2% of the vote. Abrams says that voter suppression led to her defeat. The election was marred by widespread reports of irregularities. Her new organization, Fair Fight 2020, is working to ensure that all voters have access to the polls. The organization is bringing awareness and advocating for election reform at all levels. Stacey, always good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
So, voter suppression would seem very personal to you. But when you look at what voters are interested and concerned about, it's not on their list of top 3, top 5, top 10. What is it that you want people to know? How can we make people understand why this is so important?
Voter suppression is the baseline that determines whether your voice is heard, whether the values and the policies that you want ever come to fruition. We have to recognize that voter suppression is no longer the images from the 1960s or the laws of the 1960s that forbade voting for African Americans or the denial to Native Americans of citizenship until 1924. What we're talking about is whether you can register and stay on the rolls, whether you can cast your ballot, and whether your ballot is counted. And we have to think about that entire spectrum, because over the last 20 years, we have seen numerous laws propagated that have eroded your ability to do those things, especially if you're in a marginalized community. These laws look racially and facially neutral, meaning if you just talk about them in public, everyone thinks, oh, that's a great idea.
Race neutral,
right.
Good. Yeah.
But then you realize that, for example, in North Dakota, they passed a law saying you have to have a residential address on your driver's license. Most Native Americans do not have residential addresses because they live on reservations. Therefore, they disenfranchise thousands of Native Americans. We have to think about not only what the law says, but what the law does, and that's what we're trying to tackle.
What do you say to people who say that voter ID laws or exact match policies are essentially protecting the election process?
First of all, voter fraud is a myth. It does not exist. People aren't putting on, fake mustaches trying to vote twice. But voter suppression is real. We know that voter ID laws seem perfectly normal, but if you lived in Alabama when they passed their voter ID law, they also shut down 2/3, I believe, of the organizations of the DMVs in black communities so that the very people who needed those IDs would not be able to get them. My point is that the laws are wrong. We have to fix those laws, because as long as we have eligible American citizens who cannot cast a ballot, then the game is rigged, because in a democracy, you should be allowed to make your voice heard. And as long as there are rules that prevent that from happening, rules that should not exist, that's a problem for America.
Good morning, Mainers! My name is Andrew Bossy, and I am the Executive Director of Maine Citizens for Clean Elections. Thank you so much for being here today. We are here to celebrate an important and remarkable citizen-led effort that will shine a light on dark money in our elections, make our politicians more accountable to us, and restore our Maine clean election law. We're here today because we want a government that's accountable to voters, not bought and paid for by wealthy special interests.
From Kittery to Allagash and from Bethel to Lubec, Maine voters stepped up to collect signatures in all 16 counties across the state. And today, we are presenting 85,185 signatures to qualify a measure for the ballot that will ensure that everyone, not just the wealthy, are represented in our democracy. This movement is growing, this movement is gaining steam, and it won't stop until it's unequivocally clear that we want a government that's accountable to voters.
It's fitting to mark the anniversary of the disastrous Citizens United ruling with a concrete demonstration of Maine's motto, Dirigo, or I lead. The future is in our hands. We simply will not back down when it comes to strengthening our democracy and the role of everyday people in it.
Thank you very much, Andy, and welcome to all of you here today. Good morning. I am Jolene Lovejoy, and as Andy said, I'm a very proud resident of the town of Rumford. In the year 2000, I had the greatest honor of running for the Maine House of Representatives as both a Republican and as a clean election candidate. I support clean elections because I believe a candidate should never feel beholden to anyone other than the citizens that they run to represent. I wanted clean elections to work because I wanted to come to Augusta and represent only the people that had voted for me in my district. Through my experience, both in business and community service, I've learned that all of us have something unique to contribute. Our message is loud and it is clear. We are tired of big, dark money calling the shots. Whether we're Democrats, Republicans, or even independents, we are all Mainers first and foremost.
People from all walks of life, from all political stripes, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, unenrolled, Greens, everybody.
Behind me is the capital of Illinois. We're in Springfield to do our third money drop, throwing fake money on the heads of the House of Representatives, calling them out, telling them there is a movement growing across this country to get money out of politics and people back in.
On that $100,000 piece. Members of the House, we are here to put an end to the corrupt flood of money in politics. How do we fix the economy? This will be ignored. How do we fix the money?
Contribution is defined as anything of value given or loaned to influence an election. It doesn't matter if you contribute money, investments, gold, or any other item of value. Individuals and groups can contribute up to $2,300 every election cycle to a candidate. Political action committees, or PACs, can be formed as long as they exist for 6 months, taking contributions from more than 50 people, and contribute to at least 5 candidates, and they can give $5,000 per candidate per election. An individual can give $5,000 to a PAC, $10,000 to their state party, and $28,500 to their national party, though they can't give more than $42,700 total to candidates and $65,500 to all PACs and parties. After the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision, corporations, banks, and unions can create a political committee that will donate to candidates, called a super PAC. This means any kind of corporation of any size organized for any reason, not just big companies like Pepsi and Microsoft, although they can too. Corporations are still prohibited from giving unlimited amounts to political parties, called soft money, under one of the provisions of the McCain-Feingold Act. Any political organization that deals with more than $25,000 a year has to disclose the identity of their donors except for 3 types of organizations: trade associations, labor organizations, and social welfare organizations. None of these groups can spend more than half their time and money on campaign activities, but they also don't have to disclose who gave them money. Sometimes they work with a super PAC. A candidate can spend as much of their own money on their election as they want. The spending limit for the party is determined by a formula that includes variables like the population in the district and the cost of living there. A party can also distribute general campaign materials like pins, signs, brochures, and posters without limit, as long as the materials are distributed by volunteers and in person. Any person or group can spend as much money as they want to on election activities as long as they don't coordinate it with the candidates. Spending is coordinated with the candidate if the candidate helps pay for it, requests it, decides what the activity will be, or discusses what to do with the person spending the money. Due to Citizens United, corporations and unions now have no limit on the money they can spend to directly advocate for or against a candidate, as long as they indicate who is spending the money and don't coordinate it with the campaign.